Fear doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a whisper, so faint you mistake it for wind, until the night reminds you that wind doesn't speak your name. My name is Isaac, 38 years old. 12 years serving as a forest ranger in the vast sweep of pine wilderness that locals around northern Idaho simply call the Backline. On park maps, it has a formal name, Deepwell National Forest. But the locals don't use that name. They call it the Pines, just the Pines, as if reducing the name somehow acknowledges what's older than the land, what breathes beneath it. They speak with respect, but also with fear, a caution you feel before you fully understand. I didn't start out scared of this place. I loved everything about the woods, the crisp resin scent that sharpens the senses, the hush of the wind gliding through the needles, the way a full moon paints the branches silver. I came here because I believed the forest needed protectors, people willing to walk into the dark so others could enjoy the calm. I didn't believe in hauntings or urban legends. I believed in behavioral ecology, in trail safety, in the idea that every sound has a source, every mystery a natural explanation. That was before the pines began whispering back. They warned me early. I just didn't listen. When I first moved into the ranger outpost, a simple log station with a radio room, a metal desk, and a cot that groaned every time I turned, I thought solitude would be the challenge. But it wasn't the loneliness that got under my skin. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone long before I had any reason to believe otherwise. Maybe it was the footprints. Large, wide, spaced like something with a long stride. Teeth-like impressions in the dirt where nails should have been. The local kids told stories of a towering figure that prowls between the pines, shaggy and silent as snowfall. They gave it a name passed down for generations in these parts, the Woodwalker. Some called it a Yeti. Others swore it was something older. I smiled when I heard the tales, but not because I thought they were silly. I smiled at the eerie coincidence. Those tracks I saw on my very first week out here matched their stories too well, too convincingly. Still, I chalked it up to imagination. The mind sees what it expects to see. But the pines didn't need myths to frighten me. They had their own ways. The first real story, my first true taste of fear, began on a late October night. Cold enough that your breath hangs in the air like a spirit reluctant to leave you. I was settling in, sipping instant coffee and reading through patrol logs when the radio, silent for hours, crackled to life with a single whisper. Not static, not distortion. A voice, barely audible, like someone speaking just outside a window. It said, "Help." That was it, just one word. The radio then returned to its ordinary hush, like nothing had happened at all. I leaned forward and pressed the transmit button, keeping my voice calm, though my heart thudded so hard the cot frame rattled under me. "Ranger 1 here. Identify your location." No answer. I tried again. "This is Deepwell Ranger Station. Do you need assistance?" Still nothing. Only the gentle hum of a system that shouldn't have received a transmission from outside our network to begin with. Was it a glitch? A prank? My mind tried every rationality it could grab, but the voice wasn't the strangest part. It sounded like a child. Protocol required me to investigate, so I pulled on my thermal jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out into air so cold it made my bones feel hollow. Night in the pines is absolute. The trees crowd close, their trunks like dark pillars rising into infinity. Even the moonlight struggles to reach the forest floor. Flashlight beams don't reveal the space around you. They only highlight everything the darkness refuses to show until you're already too late. I followed the maintenance road south toward Campsite 3, the closest site to my outpost. The crunch of gravel underfoot felt like a warning. The deeper I walked, the more the forest seemed to hold its breath. No owls. No wind through branches, not even the far-off purr of a creek. Silence is normal in the woods at night, but not that kind of silence, not the silence that feels curated, intentional. My radio chirped once, louder this time, a sharp burst of static. Then nothing, another step. 2, my breath fogged upward like a ghost escaping. Then I heard it, a knock, single, hollow. Ahead of me in the dark, I froze. The pines around me stood as motionless as stone. Knock. I lifted the beam of my flashlight slowly, sweeping across tree bark, picnic tables, the outline of an abandoned fire pit. The sound had direction, coming from the campground outhouse, a small wooden structure that suddenly seemed too old, too fragile. My legs didn't want to move closer. But duty wasn't about comfort. I stepped forward. Knock. My light slid across the door. A handprint was smeared across it. Muddy, small, child-sized. I reached for the handle. Cold metal stung my fingertips. The hinges creaked, dragging out the moment longer than necessary. Inside, it was empty. No one. Just the sour smell of disinfectant and earth. "Hello?" I called softly. "Are you hurt?" Then I heard breathing. Not human breathing. Breath that gurgled low in the throat, as if lungs were struggling to remember how to inhale. I snapped my light upward, and that's when I saw movement near the ceiling, a shadow peeling away from darkness, like something lanky and hunched had been clinging above the doorframe. The shape dropped. My flashlight clattered to the ground when I stumbled backward into the cold dirt. The beam spun wildly, flashing across limbs, too long, too thin, fingers tipped with black crusted edges instead of nails. The creature didn't charge, it simply crouched, head cocked, studying me with eyes too large and too hollow, reflecting the flashlight like twin pools of frozen lake water. My heart thrashed against my ribs. My breath came in shivering bursts. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but fear is a glue stronger than courage. Then, from behind the thing, a voice spoke again. The same small voice from the radio. "Help!" I scrambled to my feet. The creature convulsed backward, limbs jerking like a marionette's. It hissed a sound between laughter and choking. And then it sprinted, vanishing into the pines as if the underbrush had swallowed it whole. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Even after I picked up the flashlight, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It took everything in me to radio in that the campground was clear, though I knew that wasn't true. I returned to my outpost just before sunrise, exhausted, nerves frayed like dead pine needles. I sat on the edge of the cot, shoes still on, and stared at the radio. I needed to believe what I saw was an injured animal reacting defensively. I needed to believe that voice was just interference. I needed explanations that made sense. But the locals have a saying out here: the pines protect their own, and not everything wandering beneath the branches wants rescuing. I told myself the fear would pass, that I would adapt, grow stronger. That was early in my career. I didn't know then that the voice I heard wasn't asking to be saved. It was asking me to come find it. Sleep didn't come easy after that night. Every time my eyes closed, I heard that single word echoing through the static: help. A plea that didn't sound like a request. It sounded like bait, something waiting for a response. I started making excuses for the fear. Overwork, caffeine, imagination. I tried burying the incident beneath reports and trail maintenance. And for a little while, I convinced myself I had succeeded. The days kept me busy. Sunlight can make anyone feel like the world is normal. But nights remember. About a week later, a hiker went missing near the northern ridge. His truck was found parked by the trailhead, keys still in the ignition as if he meant to return any moment. A search team combed the ridgeline for hours. No clues. I joined the second sweep, pushing deeper into terrain that grew steeper and more tangled by the mile. We called his name. Our voices seemed to disappear between the trees, absorbed by bark and moss like the forest didn't want to give the sound back. The ridge rises to a rocky crown where the pines thin out and the earth bleeds into cliffs. That's where I found the first sign of him. A scrap of blue fabric snagged on a branch, fluttering in the cold wind. Hope is a dangerous spark. It can drive you into places you have no business entering. I stepped closer to the cliff edge, steadying myself against a crooked pine. I looked down. Sharp rocks. A deadly fall. No body below. He hadn't slipped. Something else had happened. We found more scraps like that. Snagged fabric, a torn backpack seam, leading toward a tree line that didn't appear on our maps. The canopy looked darker there, unnaturally clustered. One of the senior rangers, Maria, frowned as she studied the direction of the markers. This area isn't on any recorded trail system, she said. Locals told me their grandparents warned never to go there. She said it lightly, trying to pass it as a joke, but her hands were trembling when she folded the fabric into her pocket. We split into pairs to continue the search. I ended up with a rookie named Travis, 22. Eager, the kind of guy who thinks bravery is saying yes before fear has the chance to speak. He kept chatting to keep nerves down, but the forest swallowed his voice the same way it swallowed the wind. Everything we said dissolved too fast, like sound struggled to survive here. We reached the uncharted grove just as dusk sank its claws into the sky. Pines loomed close enough that their branches scraped my jacket. The forest floor softened underfoot, sponge-like, as if walking on burial ground where the soil never forgot. Then we heard it, far off at first, a rhythmic thud, not woodpecker fast, slow, intentional. Knock, silence, knock. The same hollow sound from the outhouse door. It pulsed through the trees like a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything living. Travis lifted his gaze toward the direction of the sound. "What is that?" he whispered. My voice barely made it out. "We keep searching. Call his name again." But when we did, our voices sounded strange, like someone else was repeating our words just a moment later, lower and twisted. Travis went pale. Someone's messing with us. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe anything other than the truth pressing on my chest, that the forest itself was playing along. The knocking stopped, replaced by something worse. We heard movement behind us, leaves displaced by something heavy dragging across the ground, slow, deliberate. We turned, flashlights slicing through the air. No figure, no animal, just trees staring down at us like silent witnesses. Then among the trunks, a face appeared. Small, pale, eyes dark. A child, or something shaped like one, peered from behind a tree trunk. Just a head at first, then thin shoulders wrapped in what might have been cloth or might have been skin stretched too tight. It tilted its head, studying us. The expression wasn't fear, curiosity, or even hunger. It was recognition. Travis exhaled a shaken breath. "Kid? Hey, are you—" The thing mimicked him. Same tone, same cadence, but the mouth didn't move. A cold wave surged down my spine. "Do not approach it," I hissed. The figure stepped out, too long, too jointed, legs bending wrong. Travis panicked. He stumbled back, tripping over a root. As he fell, the creature's expression snapped from neutral to something predatory, like a mask cracking to reveal the monster underneath. It sprinted. I barely had time to grab Travis's arm and haul him up. We ran, branches tearing at us, lungs burning. The thing snarled behind us, a sound like laughter scraped raw across stone. I don't remember how far we ran, only that eventually the trees parted and moonlight spilled over us like salvation. We collapsed near an outcropping of boulders, gasping. Travis's voice shook. "What the hell was that? Tell me you've seen that before. Tell me someone knows what that is." I didn't answer, because until that moment I still believed that everything frightening could be rationalized, that even the impossible must have an explanation. His breathing steadied, but his eyes kept jumping, scanning every shadow. "We have to go back. Tell the others." "We can call from the main trail junction," I said. "Signal's stronger there." We took one last look behind us. The grove was still, silent, but the fear lingered, clinging like sap to the inside of my mind. The missing hiker was never found. Official report, probable fall. Unrecovered remains. I signed the document, but the cliff hadn't taken him. The pines had. After that night, nothing felt like protocol anymore. Every call radioed in, every footprint, every rustle in the dark came with a question mark that chewed at logic. I worked harder, stayed busier, told myself fear was just a byproduct of responsibility. But the forest knew better. It waited. The third incident, what finally broke the illusion of safety, came during winter patrol. Snow changes everything. It erases boundaries, reveals what usually hides. I was alone on patrol that night, checking the frozen lake east of station. Wind whipped drifts into spirals that looked almost like figures dancing too far away to see clearly. Cold bit through layers, numbing my fingers, slowing my steps. As I neared the frozen shoreline, my light caught them. Tracks. Massive. Bare. Toes spread wide like a primate's, but with depth suggesting something heavy. They weren't leading toward the lake. They were coming out of it. The prints were half filled with slush, but fresh. Recent. Whatever made them had climbed from beneath the ice. I followed them along the bank, careful not to step in the impressions. They led to a grove of fir trees, dark enough that the night inside them seemed thicker. Then my radio hissed. This time, multiple voices, all whispering over each other like a choir of children drowning. Help, help, help us. The signal crackled out. Every hair on my body stood up. Snow fell softer then, like the air itself was holding its breath. The prints continued ahead before suddenly stopping mid-stride, as if whatever left them had simply vanished into thin air. Above me, ice cracked on the lake with a thunderous boom. I turned just in time to see a shape rise beneath the frozen sheet. Something enormous, pale against the darkness of the water, pressing upward as if testing the surface. I stumbled back, slipping on ice that had no right being so slick. A second crack, then another. The ice bulged. The thing underneath exhaled a guttural, mountainous rumble. I ran. Not because I'm a coward, because survival isn't cowardice. I didn't stop running until I could see the outpost porch light, a single flickering beacon cutting through panic. I slammed the door behind me, fumbled the lock, then slid down to the floor, chest heaving, staring through the window at the tree line. Snowflakes drifted lazily, peacefully. But something was awake now, something that wanted more than fear, and I realized I wasn't protecting campers from the forest. I was protecting the forest from what lived inside it. The pines didn't need my logic. They only needed my attention. They already had my fear, and soon they would have my belief. Belief doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps into you, slow as resin, until the truth hardens around your ribs and you realize you can't breathe the way you used to. After that night by the lake, I couldn't ignore the pines anymore. The forest wasn't just alive. It was aware, watching, testing, and I wasn't its guardian. I was its experiment. A month passed. Search calls came less often in winter, but the locals never stopped whispering about disappearances. They spoke low, like the trees might be eavesdropping. One morning, a man named Elliot knocked on the outpost door. Older, 60s, beard like tangled smoke, eyes too tired for daylight. He wasn't here to report anything missing. He was here to confess something he'd been carrying for 50 years. "My brother disappeared here," he said, his voice trembling despite his weathered exterior. "We were boys, chasing each other near the gorge. He ran into the trees. I followed. He turned a corner, and he was gone." I told him children wander, panic sets in, footing slips. "No," he interrupted. "I saw him. A shadow grabbed him. Tall, white as snow, but dirty. Wrong. It dragged him backward like he was weightless." I screamed. The forest swallowed the sound. His hands shook as he reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of old newspaper, a clipping from 1973. "Search for local boy ends. Presumed dead." Elliot swallowed, eyes glossy. "I wasn't believed back then. You don't have to believe me now. I just needed someone to know I didn't lie." A child's voice on my radio, a child's handprint on a door, a child-shaped thing in the trees. I believed him, but I also knew belief wasn't enough to save anyone. Night crept up on my conscience faster after that. I slept lighter, woke at every sound, cataloged every whisper of wind against glass. The cot became less a place to rest and more a place to endure until morning. The fourth incident came on a night thick with fog. Moonlight couldn't even bleed through it. I was on night patrol, scanning for illegal campers or lost hikers. The haze swallowed the forest road, leaving only the immediate beam of my flashlight as my world. My radio clicked. Static whispered like distant waves. Then, slowly, 3 knocks, not on wood, on metal. The sound vibrated through the radio casing like someone tapping directly on the other side. Knock, knock, knock. My throat tightened. "This is Ranger 1. Identify yourself." Static stretched, long, hushed. Then a low voice, breathy and strained, slipped through. "Don't. Come back." Not a warning. A command. Every instinct in me rebelled, urging me to retreat, to step away from where the sound had found me. but my boots stayed planted as if the forest floor had gripped them with unseen roots. I forced myself to keep walking. The fog thickened. My breaths grew colder. Somewhere ahead, the trees opened into a small ranger rest cabin, a structure built decades ago for emergency shelter, rarely used except during major rescues. Its windows glowed, but no electricity ran to that cabin. I approached, boots sinking into leaves, slick with dew, heart pounding tight against my spine. The door stood slightly ajar, hinges creaking as the wind breathed through. Inside, a single lantern sat lit on a table, an old steel lantern, rust creeping up its sides, wick bright but steady, and there were photos spread beneath it. I stepped inside, scanning the walls. No signs of intrusion, no footprints except the ones I left behind. 6 photographs lay in a fan pattern, black and white. Edges frayed, different faces, different decades, but all had the same look, mouth open mid-scream, eyes wide with terror. I picked one up, a teenage girl, ponytail, freckles, her face frozen in panic, snow in the background, pines behind her. At the bottom corner of the photo, someone had written a date in smeared ink, 1973. Elliot's brother. But there were more, 1989, 2002, 2019, faces missing from families who buried empty coffins. I leaned closer, studying the images for context, for anything that could show where these were taken. That's when I saw the shadows. Each photo had a shape behind the subject, a blur, pale, towering, eyes that glowed when the light hit them just right. My pulse hammered as I shuffled to the last photograph. This one wasn't old. It wasn't printed on aged paper. It was glossy, recent, 2 weeks recent. I recognized the uniform immediately. It was mine. Me on patrol, near the frozen lake. Flashlight in hand, but the image captured more than I saw that night. Behind me, in the dark of the tree line, a tall figure, watching. The lantern sputtered. A sound came from the walls, a dragging scrape circling slow like claws testing wood grain. I backed toward the open door, heartbeat louder than breath. Scrape, scrape. Then a voice, all too familiar, breathed from just beyond the doorway, inches from me. Help us. Not one voice anymore. Dozens, layered in pain. I rushed out, slamming the door behind me, stumbling into fog that clung like fingers. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for my mind to catch up. I ran. Branches whipped my arms, roots clawed my ankles. Something followed, footsteps heavy enough to shake dew from leaves. But the fog thickened so much it hid everything except fear. I reached the outpost with lungs burning, body shaking, sweat freezing on my neck. I locked the door, pushed a chair against it, even though wood wouldn't stop whatever lived out there. My radio clicked once, then silence. That night marked the first time I admitted the truth. The fear wasn't going to fade. It was going to escalate, and then it was going to claim something. The 5th incident happened when spring returned, when trails reopened and laughter returned to campsites, as if the forest hadn't spent winter awakening something ancient. A family checked into campsite 7, parents and a little girl maybe 6 years old, pink boots with cartoon bears on them. She waved at me shyly while they unloaded gear, the kind of scene that used to fill me with pride, families trusting the wilderness, trusting me. But the pines were hungry again. That evening, as dusk painted the sky purple, I hiked past to check in. The father smiled, thanked me for keeping the forest safe. The girl sat near the fire, humming, arranging pine cones in a circle. I leaned down with a friendly smile. Making fairy rings? She shook her head without looking up. Not fairies. Oh, what then? She finally lifted her eyes. They told me not to tell. The fire crackled. My breath thinned. Who told you? I asked gently. The ones in the trees. Her voice wasn't frightened. It was loyal. Her mother approached, laughing it off, kids and their imagination. I tried to smile, but the girl kept staring at me. Eyes too old for someone still learning how to spell her name. That night, I patrolled nearby, staying close enough to hear campfire chatter. Normal. Relaxed. Nothing wrong. Until after midnight. A scream shattered the stillness. I bolted toward the site, flashlight slicing through branches. The mother stood near the tent, frantic, calling her daughter's name. Her father tore through bushes, shouting, stumbling into darkness. I joined the search. We split up, hearts pounding, like flashlights trembling. My voice cracked as I yelled for her, each call swallowed faster by the forest. Then, a giggle. Soft, playful. I spun toward the sound. My light flickered over trees, dancing leaves, and there she was, standing among the trunks, only her silhouette visible, hands hanging limp, head tilted, not frightened, waiting. "Sweetheart," I shouted. "Don't move. I'm right here." She turned her head slowly. Her skin was wrong, grayish, eyes hollow, lips too still. Something behind her shifted, a large, pale limb coiling upward like it had been crouched there with her. The creature's hand rested gently on her shoulder. Possessive, as if claiming a prize. I reached for my radio, but a single whispered word stopped me cold. Closer. The voice wasn't the girl's. It wasn't the creature's. It was the forest. My boots refused to move. Fear welded them to the ground. The girl stood so still, framed in that moon-warped gloom like a marionette waiting for someone out of sight to pull her strings. The pale hand on her shoulder flexed lightly, and her body leaned, unnaturally toward me, as if she had no control over her own center of gravity anymore. I forced air into my lungs, forced my voice not to shake. "Sweetheart, it's okay. I'm here to help you." Her lips didn't move, but something behind them smiled. The creature's other arm unfolded from the darkness behind her, reaching, joint after joint bending wrong. It wasn't holding her hostage. It was guiding her. The mother's panicked cries echoed somewhere behind me. The father crashed through branches, calling his daughter's name. But they couldn't see what stood right in front of me. They didn't hear what the forest was whispering into my skull. "Closer." I lifted my flashlight, but the beam dimmed as though the darkness had teeth and was chewing through it. The girl's eyes shimmered like the reflection of a lake at night. Then, her voice. Clear, emotionless. "You're late." The words hit me like ice water. Like everything before this was only prelude. My name hung on the tip of her tongue, not because she'd learned it, but because something else had spoken it to her. The pale figure stepped forward, dragging one elongated leg through needles and dirt. My instincts finally broke through paralysis. I moved. I ran at them, adrenaline surging, grabbing for the girl's arm. My fingers brushed her jacket, cold, so cold. And the moment contact was made, the forest roared. Not sound, a pressure, a surge of void that rattled bone. The creature recoiled with a screech that split the air like metal on stone. I scooped the girl into my arms and sprinted. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She simply stared up at me, blank as untouched snow. Branches clawed my face. My lungs begged to burst. I could feel the creature behind us, its footsteps shaking the ground, claws ripping bark from trees as it chased. "Isaac," the voice behind me hissed, stretching my name into a warning. I didn't look back. The trail opened toward the campsite. The fire's glow a desperate beacon. The parents turned, relief detonating on their faces, but that relief vanished as soon as they saw their daughter's expression. Her stare wasn't human anymore. The mother reached for her, panic wild, but the girl buried her face into my chest almost instinctively, as if I were the one she trusted in this nightmare. I lowered her to the ground gently. Her lips parted in a tiny exhale. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "For coming where?" Behind us, the trees shook. A crashing pursuit stopped short at the edge of the clearing, as if the creature hit an invisible wall between forest and firelight. The parents didn't see it, didn't understand, but they felt its presence, felt the hunger burrowing through the dark. The father gripped his wife's shoulder. "Get her in the truck. Now." We evacuated immediately, radioing base on the way. Emergency protocol. A missing child found meant tears, relief, paperwork. But this wasn't that. Not even close. Back at the outpost, the girl barely spoke. Doctor said mild hypothermia, shock. The parents clung to each other, unaware of how close their daughter had come to being taken not by wolves or weather, but by something ancient and cunning. They left by sunrise. But the girl watched me through the rear window of their Subaru as it drove away. And as the car disappeared into a trail of dust, I could still hear the whisper. "You're late." Not scolding, not grateful. Prophetic. The forest wasn't finished. Over the next week, more voices bled through my radio, names of hikers from years past, pleas that didn't fade no matter how often I switched channels. The pines whispered through static, through branches, through dreams fractured by sleeplessness. Reality became a thread pulled tight, and I was fraying fast. One night, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked the sky. Rain slapped the outpost roof like fists demanding to be let in. I sat at the desk, staring at maps that had begun to feel like lies. A flash of lightning lit up the windows, and I saw a shape standing in the tree line. Tall, lean, white, staring. Another flash, now closer. Just inside the fence, thunder swallowed sound, but the silence after it was worse. I reached for my gun, not for reassurance, but because courage felt like fiction now. My fingers trembled so hard I fumbled the safety. The radio erupted into static. Then a child's voice, clear, as if she stood right behind me. "They don't like waiting." I turned. Empty room. Cold breath licked the back of my neck. Lightning struck again. The window was filled. A face pressed against the glass, skin too tight across bones, eyes so wide the whites glowed. Its breath fogged the pain. Something slimy smeared where its face dragged sideways in a grin that didn't belong to a living mouth. The door shook, one violent bone-cracking jolt, then stopped. A lull. I could hear rain dripping off its body, hear claws sliding down wood with agonizing patience. The pines were letting me know I was theirs now. Fear didn't numb me anymore. It fueled me. I grabbed a flare from the supply locker, kicked the door open, and hurled the flare into the trees. It burst red heat, painting the figure in light. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. 8 feet tall, fur matted thick with sap and mud, limbs bent wrong, chest rising in a slow, unnatural rhythm. But the face, it wasn't the monstrous snout of legend. It was half-human, as if it wasn't done transforming or had once been something else. The flare hissed out in the dirt. Darkness swallowed everything again. Silence followed. Not retreat, reconsideration. I backed toward the door, gripping the frame with frozen hands. I didn't want to turn my back on the trees. Not ever again. The creature stepped forward. Not fast. Confident. Thunder rolled again. Lightning ripped the sky open, and it was gone. Not into the woods. Just gone. The silence that followed was a sentence. The pines had been waiting for me to see it. To accept it. To acknowledge the rule that I had broken. I wasn't the hunter here. I was the chosen. I did not sleep that night. I stood with my back to the wall, watching the window, gun shaking in my hands until my arms numbed. The forest didn't need to attack. It only needed to show me how close it could get. When dawn finally cut through the branches, I walked outside, not to patrol, not to investigate, but to pray that fear hadn't made me hallucinate. The footprints were real, deep, spread wide, circling the outpost like a wolf testing the fence around livestock. And there, directly beneath the window, a handprint, 5 long fingers, nails etched into the glass. It had touched where my face had been, where my breath still lingered. What was once curiosity had become pursuit, and pursuit had become invitation. I wasn't sure which part terrified me more, that the creature wanted me, or that a part of me, buried deep under the fear, wanted to follow. The pines don't trap you with claws, they trap you with questions. What is it? Where does it come from? And most dangerously, why does it call my name? I didn't have answers. Only one truth that poisoned every waking thought. The forest had chosen me for a reason, and soon it would drag that reason into the light. I used to believe that fear was something you managed, a variable you weighed against risk, a force you tamed with training, but fear isn't something you master. Fear is something you inherit. Generations before me warned of the pines. Their stories were carved into porch wood, whispered over campfires, buried in old newspaper clippings, but I hadn't listened. I'd imagined myself braver than the past. Ignorance isn't bravery. Ignorance is bait. 2 nights after the storm, word spread that a spelunker had gone missing, exploring a cave system north of the ridge. A network of tunnels rarely visited except by adrenaline addicts and locals who didn't know any better. When the call came in, something inside me went cold. A cave. Buried secrets. A place where the forest's roots might reach down into darkness and find their siblings. I volunteered to lead the response team, but no one else was available. Small department, bad timing. So I went alone. The trail to the cave cut through stands of twisted pines that leaned unnaturally as though bent by hands instead of wind. Fog clung to the forest floor, swirling between my boots with every step. Dusk pressed close before I even reached the limestone opening. It was a mouth, too literal to ignore, a yawning black throat in the hillside, breathing damp air that smelled of rust and old graves. My flashlight warmed my palm, yet the cold drift spilling from that hole worked its way through fabric and flesh, settling beneath skin. I radioed in, entering the cave system. If I don't respond in 15 minutes, send backup. Static answered. Not confirmation. Static that whispered. I stepped forward anyway. Duty is a kind of madness, especially when madness is already calling your name. The tunnel narrowed quickly, stone pressing close on both sides, ceiling dripping calcite onto my shoulders like cold tears. My beam cut through the dark, revealing claw marks etched into the rock, long grooves where something had dragged itself deeper. The missing spelunker's pack lay discarded just ahead, straps torn clean through. A helmet, cracked, blood-smearing stone in a handprint that dragged downward, not running, pulling. The radio hissed again, this time not static. Knock. 1, 2, 3. Metal on metal, echoing through a channel that shouldn't have carried sound that deep underground. My heartbeat drowned out reason. I should have turned back, called for support, closed the cave off forever. But the whispers in the dark had been chasing me for months. Every story, every footprint, every child's voice had been leading here, to the place the pines didn't want to hide anymore, the place they wanted me to enter. So I did. The tunnel widened suddenly into a cavern where the ceiling arched into blackness too high for light to find. Stalagmites rose like tombstones, slick with mineral sheen. Beneath the echo of dripping stone and thudding heart, another sound trembled, breathing. Wet, labored, ancient. My light skimmed over ground dusted with hair, coarse, gray-white strands that curled like old rope. The smell thickened, rot and damp fur. Then, movement. A hulking silhouette detached from the wall, so silent it might have always been there. My breath caught mid-inhale. The beam traced its outline, broad shoulders coated in matted fur, arms nearly scraping the floor, a chest too human, a face that wasn't finished choosing a species. The creature leaned forward, sniffing the air between us. Its nostrils flared as though inhaling my fear like perfume. I raised my weapon, hands shaking uncontrollably. "Stay back," I whispered, a plea more than a command. It didn't retreat. Instead, it turned its head toward a shape slumped against the far wall. The missing man. Breathing ragged, eyes wide with terror, arms pinned by something unseen. The creature placed its massive hand against the man's chest, not crushing, not clawing, holding. A keeper, a captor. A shepherd of the lost, I stepped forward, let him go. The creature's head snapped back to me. It moved fast, impossibly fast. In a flash, it was inches from my face, heat pouring off its body, breath reeking of soil and meat. Its eyes reflected my trembling flashlight, and in that reflection, I didn't see the spelunker. I saw me. It knew me. Knew my patterns, my nights, my fear. Knew I had been chosen the moment I stepped into the pines. A voice, too many voices stitched together, slithered through my skull. You hear them now, not through air, through bone. The creature stepped aside. Behind it, carved into rock, were drawings. Dozens. Hundreds. Figures tall and pale, hunched over human silhouettes. Bodies dragged into caves. Children held by elongated hands. And in one drawing, one fresh, still carved with flakes of stone at its base, a ranger, face pressed up against a window, a single handprint beside his head. My legs almost gave out. This wasn't a random haunting, not a monster hunting blindly. This was ritual, legacy, and I had been walking straight into my role. The spelunker whimpered and the creature growled, not at me, but at him, a territorial warning, as if I were no longer the threat, as if I were the successor. "No," I muttered, breath shaking. I don't belong to you. I protect the forest. I protect people from—" The cavern trembled with laughter, not voiced. Felt on the walls, in the stone, in the marrow of the earth. The pines had never needed protecting from us. They had been cultivating us, preparing a caretaker. The creature stepped back with slow, regal inevitability, revealing the spelunker fully. His shirt was torn, the skin beneath etched with deep gouges, symbols, marks. Just like the carvings, the man's eyes met mine, begging, not for rescue, for a mercy I could never give. He didn't belong to the living anymore. I took one step backward, then another. The creature didn't follow, but its eyes stayed locked to mine, unblinking, a vow forged in darkness. I ran. I don't remember reholstering my weapon, don't remember gasping up the tunnel or bursting into night air so cold it burned. I just remember the feeling. The forest wasn't pursuing me anymore. It was waiting, because I wasn't escaping, I was transforming. The pines don't stalk their prey. They raise their heirs. I stumbled down the trail, lungs ripping with each breath, trees whipping past in silent judgment. The outpost lights came into view, flickering orange like a distant campfire from childhood. I collapsed inside, locking the world out with every bolt and latch. My hands smeared dirt and blood over the desk. My reflection in the window looked older than yesterday, eyes sunken, skin pale with the aftermath of truth. The radio crackled. I stared. Not a whisper. Not static. A voice I knew. The girl. "You're almost ready," she breathed. "Don't be scared." Every cell in my body revolted. I pulled the radio cord from the wall, threw the unit to the floor. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was acceptance. I felt the forest pressing against the walls of the outpost. Close, patient, confident. The pines weren't out there anymore. They were inside me. They had shaped every fear into curiosity, every curiosity into duty, every duty into destiny. I looked at my hands, trembling from exhaustion, yet beneath the tremor was a hunger, a pull. The cave had not been an end. It was an introduction. I stepped outside into dawn. The air was so still, it was as if the world paused to witness the moment. Pines whispered, not with wind, but with memory. And for the first time, I whispered back. I am still a ranger, but not a protector, a guardian of what this land truly is, a steward of forgotten things, a watcher between two worlds, human and everything humanity buried under myths and warnings. The locals will keep whispering their stories about the pines. They'll speak of disappearances and shadows and creatures that stare in through glass, and I will listen. Because those stories are mine now. The forest doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be remembered. My name is Isaac. I once believed these woods needed someone brave, but now I know the truth. The pines don't choose the fearless. They choose the ones who fear just enough to step deeper and never want to come back. And if you ever visit this forest, if you hear a knock where no one should be knocking, if a voice whispers your name through static or wind, you run. Don't investigate. Don't hesitate. Don't look back. Because the pines remember everyone who enters, and they never stop calling those who almost answered. I haven't disappeared, I've been found, and the spirits of the pines still whisper. I used to believe that fear was something you outgrew, something that faded with experience, logic, and time. Working the forests taught me otherwise. Fear isn't immaturity. Fear is a warning, a memory built into the body, reminding you that the wild has teeth, and it remembers every soul that ever dared to walk into its darkness. My name is not important, and it's better that way. I'm a forest ranger, just one of thousands across the United States who have dedicated their lives to protecting these lands. But the forest I patrol is different. It's older than any of us, shaped by wind and water and something else, something that feels like it's watching. The locals call it Whispering Pines National Forest, though that's not the name you'll find on any official map. The nickname stuck because, as they say, the trees here never stay silent, even when there's no wind. I'm 38 years old, 13 years in the National Park Service. I've worked places most tourists only dream about. Red deserts, icy mountains, wetlands with eyes under the water. But I've never stayed anywhere as long as I've stayed here. Whispering Pines has a way of pulling people back, holding them like a secret. I arrived almost 6 years ago, Transferred after a wildfire destroyed most of my previous district. I was lucky to be alive after that incident. Maybe I owed the forest a debt, and this was repayment. I didn't think much of it then. I do now. The first months were uneventful, at least compared to what came later. Standard calls, lost hikers, reckless campers, couples arguing in tents, but nature kept throwing strange little warning shots, close calls disguised as coincidences. Like the day I followed what looked like bare footprints far up a snowy ridge, too far for anyone barefoot to survive. They ended at a cliff edge as if the owner simply walked off into the valley air. Or the calls we'd get late at night from a payphone on the edge of the park, someone whispering, "Don't let it leave the forest." The line always disconnected before we could trace it. No one ever caught the caller. No one ever claimed responsibility. The sheriff stopped filing reports after the 5th time, but I wrote every detail down, habit or instinct. The biggest town near the forest is Pine Harbor. Small population, mostly families who have been here longer than any official records. The kind of people who speak with hushed voices when the sun goes down, who tell children to stay away from the tree line after twilight, who carve strange symbols into their barn doors every autumn. On my 2nd week, the mechanic who fixed my patrol ATV pulled me aside and said, "Whatever you do, Ranger, don't follow whistling into the woods." I laughed it off. He didn't. The deeper I got into this community, the more I realized that everyone here had a story. Stories about the forest taking people it liked, about an ancient shape in the fog, a white figure that walked upright but left no animal tracks. If you asked for proof, they'd shrug and say, "Proof is what the forest buries." I didn't take them seriously, not then. I thought fear made people superstitious. I thought age made old stories grow teeth. And maybe some of that is still true. But logic means nothing when the trees begin whispering your name. One evening, a few months into the job, I was stationed alone at the North Lookout Tower, a wooden structure built decades ago to watch for smoke rising above the pines. It sits on a steep ridge overlooking miles of untouched wilderness. The radio stays quiet most nights, and the only company is the crickets and the nighttime wind brushing along the needles. At dusk, I heard a whistle. Not the wind. Not a bird. A clear, steady pattern, 3 notes rising, 2 falling. It came from far down the slope where the trees thicken and the ground becomes a dense cathedral of roots. I leaned forward over the railing and scanned the shadows for a flashlight or a hiker. Nothing. Then the whistle repeated, a little closer this time. I told myself it was some kid playing a prank. But pranks don't carry sound uphill against the wind. Still, I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the tree line again, trying to catch any sign of movement. Silence. I stood there longer than I should have, long enough for the quiet to feel pointed, like something down there was waiting for me to respond. When it came a 3rd time, closer again, I stepped back. Not because I was scared, I wasn't, not yet, but because something in that sound knew how to pull at instincts I hadn't felt since childhood. I locked the hatch to the tower and tried to convince myself that whoever was down there would eventually leave. The night stretched on, thick and heavy. I kept checking the windows. The forest below remained still, too still. Even the crickets retreated into silence, leaving the air empty except for the soft static hum of the radio. Then at 2:13 a.m., a knock on the hatch. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I froze. The ladder up to the tower is metal. You can't climb it without making noise, but I hadn't heard a single step. The wind outside was calm, dead calm, so the sound came through perfectly. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed my radio, but my hand wouldn't stop shaking long enough to press the button. I told myself it had to be another ranger. A joke. Someone testing the new guy. But no one leaves the station at 2 a.m. to hike 4 miles in darkness just for a prank. I forced myself to look through the trapdoor window. A small metal square reinforced to keep raccoons out. My breath fogged up the glass. I wiped it clear. Looked again. Nothing. Just moonlight filling empty air. Whoever or whatever had knocked was gone. I waited until sunrise before climbing down. The ground below the tower was untouched, no boot prints, no marks at all, but the steel ladder was wet, as if something with damp hands had climbed it. The dew couldn't reach that high. I reported the incident, but the chief ranger just grunted. "The woods played tricks on rookies," he said. "Get used to it." His voice had a tremor he tried to hide, and I have never seen him out in the woods after dark, not once. After that night, I promised myself I would never ignore the signs again, because the forest doesn't knock for no reason. Something wanted my attention. Something wanted me aware. Weeks passed without another incident, but Whispering Pines doesn't forget. It waits until you feel safe again, and then it shows you why you never should have. The second time it came for me, I was alone again, patrolling the old quarry trail just before sundown. The trees grew thicker in that part of the forest, the pine trunks rising close together like prison bars. The deeper you hike, the darker the air becomes. You start to lose the horizon, unable to tell how far you've gone. I remember pausing to take a sip of water. The woods were silent again. No birds, no insects, just the soft, smothering quiet that follows something unseen. Then a smell. Not animal, not decay. Something colder. A smell like damp stone inside a cellar, mixed with old blood and metal left out in the rain. It slid into my lungs before I could stop it, and suddenly every instinct I ever ignored came roaring awake inside me. Fear isn't something you outgrow. It's something the dark teaches you to respect. That smell dragged me backward in time, back to the wildfire that nearly killed me years earlier. The same metallic sting in the air, the same burning pressure in my chest, except nothing was burning here, nothing was wrong. The trail behind me was empty. The world was normal, except it wasn't. A branch snapped somewhere to my left, too heavy a break for a deer, too sharp for a falling limb. I turned, hand on the grip of my flashlight, expecting some hiker trying to sneak up behind me. I lifted the beam, but the light hit only trees. Pine trunks stacked so thick they looked fused together, bark peeling in thin curls like torn fingernails. I told myself to breathe. One breath, another. Then I heard it. A low exhale. Not a growl, not a snort, an exhale. A sound a creature makes when it's been holding its breath for a very long time, waiting patiently for the right moment to move. I swung the flashlight again. My heart beat so hard I could hear it pushing blood through my skull. The beam shook across the forest floor. Needles, roots, rocks. Then I heard the exhale again. Closer, right behind me. I didn't scream. Instead, some old instinct, something older than training, told me to run. But rangers don't run from noises. We run toward them. We protect. We help. At least, that's the lie we tell ourselves until the dark breathes behind us. I tightened my jaw and turned slowly. My fingers were slick against the flashlight from sweat. The beam cut open another layer of shadows and showed nothing, just more trees. The silence felt heavy again, like the air itself was clenching its fists. Then the smell vanished. As suddenly as it had come, it was gone, like the forest closed its mouth and swallowed whatever had been leaking. I forced myself to walk back to the ATV, every step echoing against my ribs. The forest didn't follow, not that day. Back at the ranger station, I tried to explain what I'd encountered. My supervisor listened without interrupting. He's a big man, white beard, strong shoulders, looks like a storybook lumberjack. When I finished, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You smelled cave air." Not a question. A statement. I didn't know how to respond. Cave air? It sounded ridiculous. He nodded once, eyes darkening. We get reports like that every few years, always right before somebody sees something they wish they hadn't. His face tightened. "Do not go looking for the source." I asked him what he'd seen. He shook his head. "I still don't believe what my eyes told me, and I won't make the same mistake twice." He walked away. That was the first and only time I'd seen him rattled. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. There was no shape, no movement, no eyes, just sound and smell and instinct. Fear without a face. The worst kind. But fear recedes eventually. We rationalize, we decide nothing happened. We go back out into the woods, because if we don't, the forest wins. Months passed. Spring arrived. Snow melted into cold, clear streams. Tourists returned in hiking boots and rented RVs, asking where to see the best waterfalls. And like a fool, I began to convince myself that my imagination had played tricks on me. Adrenaline. Isolation. Too many horror stories from locals. Until I met the old trapper. His name was Earl, and he lived in a cabin deep in the valley, far from any road. He had a small solar panel and a radio that worked only when the weather felt generous. He rarely came into town, claimed the trees told him when he needed groceries. I laughed the first time he said that. He didn't. He asked me if I'd heard the breathing one, said it walked on 2 legs and lived in the deep caves beneath the forest. But it hunted above ground, late evening, early morning, when shadows were long and mistakes were easy. You'll smell it before anything else, he told me, gnawing on a strip of dried meat. Smells like the earth remembers blood. He spat onto the ground. If you smell that, you turn around. Don't look, don't breathe, don't let it know your name. When I asked how he knew all this, he stared past me like he was seeing something else entirely. My brother didn't listen. Nothing left of him now but the stories this place keeps. I asked him if he thought it was human. He laughed, a dry, terrifying sound. If it is, we ain't. The sun was low when I drove away from his cabin. My shift was over. Most rangers love that moment. Heading home through dusky pine corridors, windows down, the smell of resin sweet in the cooling air. But that night, every tree felt like a warning tower. The orange glow of sunset leaking through the branches looked like fire trapped in wood. When I got home, I triple-locked the door and left every light on. 2 nights later, the forest made sure I understood that Earl was no storyteller. I was coordinating a search effort for a missing hiker, a 19-year-old college kid who went off-trail trying to get a better photo of the ridge at sunset. They always want the perfect photo. The last picture on his camera showed his boot halfway off the trail, leaning over a drop. He thought he could stand on the edge. He was wrong. We found where he slipped. We found the scuff marks where he tried to climb back up. We found the blood where the rock cut into his hands, but we didn't find him. Not even a shoe. Nothing. As the team packed up for the night, I stayed behind to document the site. Standard procedure. Snapshot the area, record weather conditions, note any evidence for the incident report. That's when I smelled it again. Cold stone, dark metal, cave air. There, in the open heights of the ridge. I dropped my notebook. Every hair on my body reached toward the opposite direction. It wasn't just the smell. It was the feeling behind it, like someone huge stood right at my back, too close, too still, waiting for me to turn around. I forced myself to speak. Hello? Is someone there? My voice sounded strangled. Silence. Then a whisper. A breath so faint it should have been impossible to hear, but I heard it clearly, delivered directly into the hollow beneath my ear. Don't let it leave the forest. My knees nearly buckled. I spun so fast I nearly fell off the ledge. No one. Nothing. But at the far edge of my vision, too quick to track, something tall slipped behind a tree. Tall like a man on stilts, broad like a bear, covered in shadow so thick my flashlight couldn't pierce it. I didn't try to follow. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the truck. Lungs on fire, boots sliding on loose rock. I slammed the door and locked it, even though glass wouldn't stop whatever I saw. I should have radioed the others. I should have stayed with the team. But instinct drove me home. I sped through winding forest roads, barely able to see through the shaking in my hands. Back in my house, I curled on the couch, my back against the wall, every light blazing. Hours passed. I waited for the knock on my door, or the window, or the walls. None came. But at 4:11 a.m., my porch light flickered, then died. The bulb was brand new. I stared toward the front door, holding my breath. Something moved across the wood slats. Slow, deliberate footsteps, too heavy for a person. I prayed it would keep going. Instead, it stopped, 1 step beneath my door, and then a deep inhale. Like whatever stood there was tasting my fear. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. I covered my mouth, trying not to make a sound. A moment of absolute stillness. Then, knock. Soft. but intentional. Like a reminder, I know where you sleep. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I didn't even dare swallow. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, away from the house, back into the trees. The porch light flickered to life again, steady and warm like nothing had happened at all. But everything had changed because now I knew it wasn't just watching. It was interested. It was coming back for me. For days after that night, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the footsteps on my porch. Sleep deprivation can do terrible things to the mind, and fear is a sculptor. It shapes the darkness into the exact monster you're most afraid of seeing. But denial is only strong until evidence forces surrender. 2 mornings later, I found prints in the mud beneath my front steps. Not boots, not paws. Bare feet. Huge, wider than my chest, longer than any human step should be. Toes splayed like a primate's, except each toe had a blunt tip that looked worn, as if nails had been ground down by stone. The stride was too wide for a person, too clean for an animal. I photographed them, measured them, logged them, rituals of logic to stave off the truth. But when I looked back over my shoulder, the woods pressed in close, dark, and waiting. Watching. I didn't sleep much after that. Coffee became a meal. The radio stayed on through every shift, static comforting the same way breathing does, proof I was still alive. And then the screaming started. At first, it was just one call. A panicked voice over the emergency line. Someone yelling from the campground on the east side of the valley. A man claiming something had taken his dog. He said it dragged the animal into the woods. That he tried to chase it, but it moved too fast. 2 steps for every 10 of his. He described its shape as a shadow with shoulders. He said its breathing followed him all the way back to his RV. By the time I got there, he refused to leave the vehicle. His hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a pen to sign the incident report. His eyes kept darting to the tree line, like he expected something to peel itself out of the dark. We never found the dog. 2 nights after that, a group of teenagers called in, out of their minds with terror. They'd been camping near Rattlesnake Creek and started hearing someone outside their tents saying their names. Not yelling, not whispering, just calmly repeating each name in turn as if memorizing them. The voice sounded human at first, until it repeated a name backwards, syllables chewed like broken glass. The sheriff chalked it up to pranksters, but the footprints we found circling their tents weren't human. They matched the prints from my porch. That's when Pine Harbor changed. Locals who once sat outside their homes at night began locking their doors before sunset. The mechanic stopped telling jokes and started giving warnings. Even Earl appeared at the ranger station one afternoon, face gray with worry. "It's hungry," he said, "and fear smells like food." I asked him what it was. He didn't answer. He only pressed a carved wooden charm into my palm, a rough figure shaped like a tall man with long arms and no face, and told me to nail it above my door. When I asked him how it was supposed to help, he said, "It won't, but maybe it'll know you've been warned." Then he walked straight into the woods and disappeared. The next night, I was assigned patrol deeper than I'd ever been sent before. A stretch of trail old maps barely acknowledged. The weather had turned strange, dense fog rolling in from the mountains, thick as breathing cotton. My headlights carved tunnels through white nothing. Halfway down the gravel road, my radio crackled to life. "Ranger, are you receiving?" I lifted the mic. "Copy. Go ahead." Static hissed. Then a voice. But it wasn't the voice of dispatch. It was my own voice. "Don't let it leave the forest." I slammed on the brakes. The radio fell from my hand. My pulse hammered in my throat like it wanted to break free. "Dispatch?" I whispered. Silence. Then through the fog, knocking. Not on my door, not on the window, on the hood of my vehicle. A slow, heavy rhythm, metal bending slightly beneath each impact. I reached for the ignition, but at the same moment, something began to scrape down the windshield. Slow, deliberate claws testing strength. I finally turned the key. The engine sputtered. Died. Another scrape, harder this time, carving lines into glass. My chest heaved. Panic swallowed every thought of training. My shaking hand flew toward the gun holster, only to stop halfway. Bullets wouldn't matter. Not against something that could breathe behind me without leaving tracks. Instead, I pushed myself sideways across the seat and kicked open the passenger door. I hit the dirt running, boots slipping in the moisture. The fog swallowed the road behind me. The impact came fast, a violent jolt to the back of the truck. The suspension screamed. Something massive had climbed onto the roof. I heard it inhale through the vents. Deep, slow, wet. I didn't look back. I ran into the trees. Under normal circumstances, that would have been a death sentence, leaving the road, plunging into the unknown. But the thought of staying there, inches beneath that thing's jaws, pushed me forward with a terror that burned like fever. Branches whipped my face. Rocks rolled beneath my boots. The trees stretched tighter around me, a cage of living wood. Behind me, the creature moved. I didn't hear footsteps. I heard air, shattered by its massive frame. Each breath shook the fog, and then it called. Not a growl, not a howl, a perfect imitation of a human voice. Mine. "Come back," it said, using my cadence, my tone. "Come back, Ranger." I stumbled, my lungs scraped against my ribs, begging for air. The night turned grainy around the edges of my vision. I forced myself to keep going until my legs buckled and I fell to my knees in the dark. I was lost. Completely. The fog closed off the world. No stars, no moon, no road. Just me and the breath of something ancient behind the trees. I pressed my back against a trunk, pulled the radio close, and whispered the only prayer I knew. "Someone hear me. Please. I don't want to die out here." Static. More static. Then a different voice. Familiar. The missing hiker. The 19-year-old. "I didn't want to die out here either." I screamed. The radio slipped from my hands into the needles. I slapped it off and held my breath, tears crawling down my face without permission. Behind me, wood cracked. A long crack. Then another. Something enormous was pushing between the trees, splitting them apart like matchsticks. A silhouette emerged, taller than any man, shoulders hunched, head nearly scraping the branches. The smell rolled toward me like a wave of rotting stone. Cave air. It paused, breathing, listening. Then it spoke again. This time in a voice I recognized all too well, the voice of the boy's mother, crying. "Please, help him." The creature took a step closer. The ground shook. I nearly fainted, pressing myself flat against the bark, wishing I could disappear inside it. And then a gunshot split the air. The creature roared, not a sound of pain, but of anger. It retreated into the fog, and heavy limbs slamming the ground as it vanished between the trees. I collapsed, shaking so violently I thought my bones might break. Footsteps approached, human ones. Rangers. The search team. They'd tracked my radio beacon. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. But they saw my face. They saw the scratches torn into my windshield. They saw the prints on the hood. And not one of them dared say I imagined it. That night, back at the station, the chief ranger poured me a cup of black coffee, locked the office door, and finally spoke the words I'd been dreading. "We're not the only ones who patrol this forest." He stared at me, eyes carved by fear he'd tried to bury for decades. "There are spirits in these pines," he whispered, "and one of them has your scent now." The chief ranger didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. But dawn comes whether we're ready or not, and duty always arrives with it. By sunrise, we were both back in uniform, pretending we hadn't just faced something that doesn't belong in sunlight. But the forest doesn't care about daylight. It only pretends to rest. The next few days passed without incident. No footprints, no calls, no screams. The creature's silence was worse than its presence, because I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. 3 days after the fog patrol, a local girl wandered into the station, barefoot, shaking, hair dripping with pine needles and mud. She was maybe 16. Her eyes were dilated wide, whites showing like a terrified deer. "We found her at the base of Devil's Spine," her father said, breathless. "She was just standing there. She doesn't talk, won't move unless we drag her." His hands trembled. We rushed her into the medic room, but she refused to lie down. She just stood there, staring at the corner of the ceiling, lips trembling like she was trying to keep a dark secret pressed between her teeth. I gently crouched in front of her and asked her name. She blinked, slow. Then her gaze drifted to me. Her voice came out wrong, like someone else inside her throat was moving her tongue. Don't follow the whistling into the woods. The cup of coffee slipped from my hand and shattered across the floor. Her father gasped. Who told you to say that? She turned her head toward him, mechanically, like a puppet finding its audience. It watches the caves. I stepped back. My heart attempted to tear itself free from my ribs. That smell, cave air, filled the room suddenly, though there were no windows open, no draft. The girl's eyes snapped forward again, and she spoke a third time, quieter. It remembers everyone who goes inside. Then she collapsed against my chest like someone had cut her strings. When she woke later in the hospital, she had no memory of what she'd said. She didn't even remember going into the woods. The doctors called it stress. I called it a warning. For the first time, I truly listened. There was a place it lived, a place beneath the forest, a cave. One the locals never named, one no map dared mark. I could have walked away then, requested a transfer, never looked back. But fear isn't a leash, fear is a question, and I needed answers. I didn't tell anyone my plan. If I had, someone would have tried to stop me. So before dawn the next morning, I loaded my pack, flashlight, rope, flares, first aid kit. I hesitated over the carved charm Earl had given me, then shoved it into my jacket pocket. Hope is a thin line, but you hold on to whatever keeps you above the dark. The creature had left too many clues. I traced the reports, the sightings, the missing. They all pointed toward a single ravine on the remote west side, Silent Hollow. The name alone should have kept me away. By the time I reached the ravine, the sun was still climbing. A soft breeze rustled the branches overhead. For a moment, everything felt safe, ordinary. Birds singing, squirrels chattering. Then silence. No wind, no wildlife, no sound. As if the forest itself held its breath. The ground sloped downward into a narrow crack in the earth, hidden behind a wall of mossy boulders. I pushed through the gap. Cold air brushed my face, too cold, like winter lived inside the rock. When my flashlight beam found the entrance, my stomach dropped. The opening was tall enough for a man to walk upright, but the stone edges were worn smooth, as if generations of something large, something broad-shouldered, had passed through again and again. I should have turned back. I stepped inside. The cave swallowed the light instantly. My flashlight cut through only a few feet of damp stone before the dark reclaimed everything beyond. The air smelled like forgotten blood. Drip, drip, drip. Water fell somewhere deep inside. My breathing echoed back at me like another person stood behind me, inhaling when I exhaled. The floor sloped downward. My boots slid on slick rock. I braced one hand against the wall, but jerked away when I felt grooves, deep claw marks, too wide for any cougar, too deliberate for collapsing stone. I whispered to myself, "Keep going," and the words were swallowed whole by the darkness. The tunnel widened ahead. My light fell upon scattered bones, deer antlers, elk ribs, skulls cracked open like coconuts. Strands of fur were smeared into the mud. A pile of shredded fabric lay against the far wall. A backpack torn apart by unimaginable force. My knees wobbled. The smell intensified. I wasn't alone down here. I never had been. A sound exhaled from deeper inside. Not a voice. Not a growl. A low, gravelly laugh. My blood froze. I backed away slowly, lifting the flashlight higher. Then something answered. A single perfect imitation of my voice, spoken from the dark behind me. "Don't run." I spun, beam searching. Nothing. But the cave walls pulsed, as if something enormous had just pushed off from them. My lungs seized. Panic boiled into instinct. I turned and sprinted upward, boots slipping, scraping, stumbling. The flashlight beam flailed wildly. The tunnel twisted, closing in like a throat about to swallow me whole. Behind me, stone cracked. Heavy footsteps slammed against the earth. Fast. It was chasing me. The air thundered with its breath, closer, closer, each inhale rattling my spine. I saw the entrance. A sliver of light. My only hope. I lunged toward it. A hand, massive, cold, fingers like iron, closed around my ankle. I hit the ground so hard my teeth clacked. Mud filled my mouth. My flashlight flew forward, landing outside the cave, beam still alive. I clawed at the dirt, kicking, every muscle screaming with survival. The hands squeezed tighter, bones grinding. I screamed, voice raw, fear no longer quiet, but desperate. Then I remembered the charm. With shaking fingers, I ripped it from my pocket and stomped it into the stone hand gripping me. A sound exploded from the dark, not pain. Fury. The hand let go. I ran like the woods themselves were collapsing behind me. My lungs tore, my vision blurred. Daylight, it was there, brighter, wider, pulling me into safety. I burst out of the cave and fell against the moss, gasping, coughing, heart about to rip apart. Behind me, silence, then a whisper. Not through the air, inside my head. You belong to this forest now. The cave mouth shivered, rock shifting, narrowing, closing, as though the earth decided it had revealed enough secrets for one day. I scrambled backward, never looking away until trees shielded me from the stone. The forest exhaled. I wasn't dead, but something inside the cave hadn't finished with me. It let me live. It wanted me alive, because now I knew, and knowledge is bait. The sun had risen fully by the time I made it back to my vehicle. My hands shook violently as I tried to start the engine. I couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow had a heartbeat. On the drive out, I found Earl waiting at the edge of the road. No vehicle, no pack, just him. He looked into my eyes, and his expression collapsed. "You opened the door," he said. I tried to speak. Failed. He shook his head. "It's going to come for you. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon, and it won't stop until you understand what it really wants." He took a step closer, placed a hand on my shoulder. "When the pines begin to whisper, run." His voice broke on that final word. Then he disappeared into the trees the way only someone who has lived their whole life in the woods can, silent as falling ash. I drove home, locked the doors, closed every curtain, and listened to the forest breathe. That night, sleep wasn't a possibility. I sat in the living room with every light on, back pressed against the wall again, just like before. Outside, the trees swayed in a wind I couldn't hear. Their silhouettes flickered across my blinds like huge fingers searching for a grip. Every hour, I checked the porch. Every minute, I forced another breath into lungs that didn't want to work. Fear is a long meal, and the forest wasn't done digesting me. The clock crept toward midnight. That's when the air changed. It grew colder, heavy, thick with a pressure that pressed the walls inward. The lights flickered, not an electrical twitch, but a shudder, as if something massive brushed past each bulb, dimming its glow. Then the breathing returned, slow, intentional, right outside my front door. Not footsteps this time. Not knocking, breathing, waiting. The same deep rhythm that had filled the fog. The same inhale I'd felt in that cave. Like the night itself needed air, I didn't move, couldn't. There's a kind of fear that sets in so deep it rewires the muscles, tells your body that stillness is the only defense left. The creature's breath grew louder, closer, hot against the wood of my door. It hadn't come in through the cave. It hadn't needed to, because Earl was right. I had opened the door. Every window hummed under invisible weight. Shadows lengthened, stretching like arms across the floor. And then a voice rose through the walls, soft yearning. "Let me see you." Not my voice now, a woman's voice, the voice of the missing girl. More voices joined, dozens, hundreds, layered on top of each other like a choir buried alive. Men, women, children, the missing, the forgotten, all of them breathing the same words through one terrible throat. "Let me see you." I staggered to my feet, gripping the nearest thing, a kitchen knife that felt like a toy in my trembling hand. My heartbeat surged loud enough to drown out everything else. My vision tunneled. The door handle clicked once. I stumbled backward. The handle turned. Slowly, carefully, a courtesy before trespass. My voice cracked through the room. "Go away." The breath paused. Then, a single knock, so soft I barely heard it, as if asking for permission. I didn't give it. I ran, through the house, toward the back hallway, toward the one place I thought I had protection. The carved charm Earl had given me, its faceless figure nailed above my bedroom door. I shut myself inside, locked the door, shoved a dresser in front of it. The knife trembled in my hand like it wanted to escape. My lungs gasped like they were drowning. Silence. Then, something pressed its entire weight against the front of my house. Wood strained. Nails screeched. The foundation moaned. My bedroom walls shivered from the force. It wasn't trying to break in quickly. It was testing the strength of what separated us. The charm rattled. The sound was almost pleading. "Go away," I whispered again, but fear has no power against something that feeds on it. A scream rose, not from me, but from deep beneath the floorboards. A sound that started human and ended broken. The voices surged louder, mocking, imitating, begging. The thing outside pushed harder. The ceiling cracked. Dust rained down like ash. It could have crushed the house, lifted the roof, pulled me out like a seed from a husk, but it didn't. It stayed at the door because it didn't want my body. It wanted my belief. I understood then. The cave wasn't its home. The cave was a threshold, a wound in the earth, and I had crossed it. I had acknowledged it. The pine trees outside rustled, yet there was no wind. They whispered, not words, warnings. The same rhythm I'd heard the first night in the lookout tower, 3 notes rising, 2 falling. The creature paused, listened, not to me, to them. A fury shuddered through its breath. A growl peeled layers off the dark. Then, silence. The weight vanished. The air released. My porch light flickered once. The house exhaled. It was gone. But I didn't come out from behind the dresser for hours. I waited until dawn stained the blinds with a gray that looked safe. Only then did I open the bedroom door and step carefully down the hall. The front of the house bore the scars, thick gouges in the siding, mud smeared across the windows like something had dragged its palms along every inch of glass. But there was something else, something that stole more breath than the monster ever could. On the door, carved perfectly into the wood, a hollow figure, long arms, no face, the exact shape of Earl's charm. Except this one was far, far larger. My hands shook as I reached for it. The grooves were fresh, the splinters still curled outward. The mark wasn't a threat. It was a claim. The thing beneath these woods knew me, and it wanted the world to know that. I called the chief ranger, told him I was leaving. Not in a week, not tomorrow, now. He didn't argue. He only said 3 words before hanging up. Don't look back. I packed what I could, clothes, documents. The carved charm. I left behind furniture, dishes, every cheap possession I'd acquired to pretend this forest was a home. By the time the sun crested the ridge, I was already on the highway, the pines shrinking smaller in the rearview mirror. I never returned to Whispering Pines, but the forest never left me. Sometimes late at night when the wind is quiet and the house too still, I wake to a smell. Cold stone, old blood, cave air. And the walls around me tighten just slightly, like they remember. I tell myself fear is just memory. That darkness doesn't follow the way light does. But I always listen for the next breath outside the window, because the locals were right. The forest keeps every story, and once it whispers your name, it never stops. I left that park as a ranger. I carry it now as a lesson. There are places in this country that do not want to be understood. Places that feed on reason and leave you gnawing on the bones of doubt. Places that look like paradise under the sun, but remember the night more faithfully than they remember dawn. If you ever find yourself wandering free beneath the pines, confident that nothing in the dark could ever shake what you believe, remember this. Some spirits protect the forest, but there is at least one that hunts it, and it remembers everyone who goes inside. So walk carefully into the wild, listen when the trees go silent. And if one night, deep in the woods, you smell cave air on the wind, don't follow whistling into the forest. Don't look toward the voice calling your name, and whatever you do, never ever answer the knock. The elk came back to the station 3 nights in a row before I finally admitted something was wrong with the way it moved. I should have known sooner. I've been wearing the badge of a wilderness ranger for 14 years, and in that time I've seen enough broken antlers, limping hindquarters, and glassy-eyed roadkill to understand the mechanics of animal suffering. But this thing, this elk, moved like an idea of an elk, like something that had only studied one from a distance and was trying to copy what it remembered. And the worst part, the part that crawled into my bones even before I had the language for what I was looking at, was that it didn't have eyes. Everyone in this job carries a story they don't talk about. Mine happened 8 years ago, long before the eyeless elk, long before the dreams started, long before I began double-checking every reflection I walked past. A kid went missing on my watch. A boy named Andrew Lorne, 12 years old. Soft-spoken, liked identifying feathers along trails. I was supposed to be the last ranger to see him alive, and maybe I was. Or maybe he lived longer than anyone thought. Sometimes I imagine he's still alive out there, walking in circles through the old growth, looking for a trail that no longer exists. On bad nights, I imagine he's walking toward me. Guilt is a quiet thing most days, but on nights like the first night the elk appeared, it hums under the skin like fever. I was closing the southern shutters of the station, logging the day's trail activity, when I saw something on the tree line. The silhouette was too still. That's what caught my eye first. Not the antlers, not the unnatural wideness of its stance, but the fact that it stood there unmoving for the entire 15 minutes. I pretended not to notice it. The air smelled like wet fur and iron, even though it hadn't rained. I told myself it was just an elk testing the boundary of human scent. They do that sometimes, if winter is rough or if predators have been circling. But it didn't flick its ears, didn't shift its weight, didn't even seem to breathe. When I finally stepped outside, the cold hit me in the lungs with a violence that didn't match the weather. The ground felt wrong beneath my boots, too soft, as if hollowed. I swept my flashlight across the slope, and that's when I saw that its sockets were empty. Not wounded, not rotten, just vacant. Smooth, as if nothing had ever belonged there. I remember whispering something to myself. I can't recall what exactly, but it was some attempt to anchor myself in procedure. Something like, animal in distress, stay calm, observe at a distance. My breath looked strange in the air. It wavered like heat rising off asphalt. The elk turned its head toward me. I know how insane that sounds, describing an eyeless creature looking at me, but there was no mistaking the shift in intention. A sudden heaviness pressed against my chest. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remind me of a weight I wasn't supposed to feel. Then it walked away. That slow, studied walk. I didn't report it. Not then. Part of me chalked it up to exhaustion. I'd been covering double shifts because of staff shortages, and the forest had been crawling with early-season hikers who didn't understand that melting snow exposes sinkholes, not safe paths. My eyes were tired. My brain was tired. And the station had always been a magnet for strange animal behavior. Salt bricks attracting deer, trash cans attracting anything with a stomach. But guilt has a way of turning your thresholds into doorways. That night, I dreamed of the boy again. In the dream, I wasn't searching for him, not exactly. I was following him. He walked ahead of me through the timber, his silhouette small but unnervingly steady. He never looked back. The forest around us was flushed with moonlight, but the shadows didn't behave correctly. They grew toward us, not away. Andrew stepped over a fallen log and said something I couldn't fully hear. His voice had changed, elongated, as if spoken through a long tube. When I reached the log, I smelled sulfur and something like burnt hair. My hand sank into the bark as though it were soft clay. He kept walking. I kept following. Eventually, he stopped at what looked like the entrance of a cave. Only, I knew this terrain. There weren't any caves within miles of where he disappeared. The rocks pulsed faintly like something beneath them was breathing. When he finally turned to look at me, he had no eyes. I woke with my heart ramming against my ribs and the metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. Sweat had soaked through my shirt. The clock glowed 3:07 a.m., and I swear for a moment I heard something outside the building, slow, deliberate footfalls circling the station. I didn't move until dawn. The next day, everything was too quiet. Animals give themselves away through noise, the rush of wings, the snap of twigs, the fluttering anxiety in underbrush. But the forest around the station felt suspended, like sound had been scooped out of it. Even the wind avoided the pines. I kept checking the tree line without meaning to, my eyes darting to the exact spot where the elk had stood. By noon, I convinced myself that if something had been wrong with the animal, I needed to track it. That was my job. Injured wildlife can attract predators, and predators can attract unprepared hikers. I radioed headquarters, told them I was conducting a perimeter assessment, and logged out. The farther I walked, the more off balance I felt. Not dizzy, not sick, just displaced, like I'd stepped slightly out of sync with the world. The shadows seemed too tall, the air too still. The earth gave occasional tremors beneath my feet, faint as a heartbeat. About a mile from the station, I found the tracks. At least, I think they were tracks. Hoof-like impressions, but too deep, as though something unnaturally heavy had been walking. The spacing was wrong as well. The pattern suggested steps taken with precision rather than instinct. I followed them. They led down slope into a part of the forest we rarely patrolled, mostly because the terrain was unstable. Old mining activity from the late 1800s had left the land riddled with abandoned shafts and collapsed tunnels. Most were sealed or buried under decades of growth, but every once in a while, a hiker stumbled across some rotting timber or rusted metal and called it in. As a rule, I avoided the area. Too many places to fall through, too many voids pretending to be ground. But the tracks led straight toward it. As I moved deeper, the smell changed. The forest normally carried the scent of pine, soil, and cold stone. But now there was something acidic in the air, something damp and metallic. I felt pressure in my ears, like descending in an airplane. When I reached the old mining zone, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost clung to the edges of leaves, even though sunlight still filtered through the canopy. A thin mist rose from the ground, as if the earth itself were exhaling. That's when I saw the elk again. It stood beside a collapsed shaft, its head tilted in that same unnatural angle. Its body twitched, not like an animal moving, but like something adjusting inside of it. Its empty sockets faced me. My hand went to my radio, but before I could speak, the ground beneath the elk shifted. Not caved, not broke, shifted, like a breath rising from below. The creature didn't react. It simply stood there, patient, waiting. Then it took one step toward the collapsed shaft and disappeared into the ground without falling, as if the earth opened just for it. I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed not to approach, but I found myself stepping closer anyway, drawn by something I don't have words for. Curiosity isn't the right term, neither is duty. It felt more like obligation, like whatever was happening had been waiting for me. The soil vibrated beneath my boots. Then something brushed my ankle. Something cold, something that withdrew the moment I noticed it. I jerked my leg back as if something had bitten me, but when I looked down, the ground appeared normal. No disturbance in the pine needles, no burrow, no hole, not even a shift in the coloration of the soil. The vibration I'd felt only seconds before had vanished, replaced by a dead heavy stillness that pressed uneasily into my ears, the kind of silence that has intent behind it. I crouched, brushing my glove across the layer of needles, half expecting something beneath to pulse or twitch in response. Nothing happened. The earth felt cold, though. Colder than the air, colder than frost. Cold like stone kept in darkness for too long. I should have backed away, should have radioed it in, should have taken note of the exact location and returned with another ranger. Procedure was a lifeline in these woods. But guilt has a way of bending protocol into something negotiable. If there was even a slight chance that the elk, whatever it was, had gone underground through a natural opening, then the terrain was compromised. Hikers could be at risk. That was the logic I clung to as I knelt beside the collapsed shaft, brushing loose debris aside until I found the old support beams. They were not where they should have been. Old mines decay predictably. Gravity handles most of the destruction. Wood rots, soil compacts, rock falls inward. But this collapse wasn't inward. The beams had been pulled down, angled sharply into the earth like fingers gripping an opening from beneath. Something had dragged them. I leaned closer to the gap between the beams. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It felt dense, like a substance. My breath clouded faintly as I exhaled, drifting into the void and freezing midair. Suspended. hanging like a pale smear of paint on a wall. I blinked hard, then reached my hand toward it. The condensation thawed instantly and vanished. Heat. Sudden, unnatural heat pushed out from the gap in a single pulse, not like a furnace, more like the exhale of something alive. The scent that followed hit me with more force than the temperature. Burnt hair. Strong and unmistakable. The sort of smell that clings to the back of your throat, that forces your body to recognize suffering even if your mind resists. I stumbled back, nearly falling. Something moved deep inside the shaft. Not sound, movement. A shift in pressure, a tremor in the soil, a ripple of warm air that crawled up the collapsed timbers like breath rolling across skin. Then came a soft, rhythmic tapping. Slow at first, then a pause, then faster. The cadence wasn't random. It had spacing, deliberation. Like someone drumming fingers on hollow wood while thinking. Testing the resonance. I held my breath, listening. The tapping stopped. And then, from somewhere in that darkness, a voice, thin and stretched and barely audible, murmured something I couldn't make out. My body reacted before my brain did. I stepped back, my hand instinctively moving toward my radio. Static crackled through the speaker before I even touched the button. Then the voice came through the radio. Not a ranger, not anyone I'd ever heard before, and not speaking any sentence I recognized. The tone wasn't human. It dragged syllables like someone imitating speech without understanding breath or timing. But the cadence, slow, rising, falling, was nearly identical to the strange, distorted voice Andrew had spoken with in my dream. I shut the radio off. The moment the static died, the forest exhaled as though it had been holding its breath too. Wind pushed softly through the trees. The temperature equalized. The oppressive silence lifted just enough that I could hear normal things again, the ticking rustle of needles, the faint creaking of branches. But the smell lingered, burnt hair and sulfur. I walked away from the shaft with careful steps, my body tensed for any sign of the elk or whatever had worn its shape to return. The sensation of something brushing my ankle replayed in my mind, over and over, each time more vivid than the last. My rational side fought back with every explanation it could muster. Tree roots shifting, a small rodent I hadn't seen, even the tremor of my own imagination filling in sensory blanks. But those explanations dissolved when I reached the crest above the station and saw what was waiting for me. The elk stood directly in front of the station's door. Its body was angled toward the building, but its empty sockets faced the trail I had just returned on. It had been standing there long enough for frost to form around its hooves. The muscles along its flank twitched at irregular intervals, like something inside it was readjusting itself, testing the shape of the body it occupied. My first thought wasn't fear, it was violation. The station was supposed to be safe, a barrier between the wilderness and the few fragile human lives responsible for maintaining it. Seeing that creature there, standing inches from the door I slept behind, felt like an intrusion deeper than any claw mark or broken window. I didn't move. It didn't move. Then the temperature around us shifted again. A brief wave of heat rolled through the clearing, so strong and sudden that the frost at its hooves evaporated. The elk's entire frame shuddered. Its head jerked upward. A low, humming vibration carried through the ground, faint but deliberate like a signal. And then it walked toward me. Not fast, not threateningly, just with intent. I stepped, the elk paused. My breath fogged in front of me, and for a split second, the fog didn't drift normally. It bent, curved slightly toward the elk as though pulled by some weak gravitational force. My chest tightened. The air smelled of wet fur and something warm, something that didn't belong in winter. The elk took another step. That broke the paralysis. I backed away, hand on my belt, fingers brushing my tranquilizer kit. It wasn't meant for large animals like elk, more for cougars, injured bears, but right then, I didn't care. Anything that might slow it down felt like a lifeline. I raised the dart gun. For the first time, the elk reacted. Its entire body stiffened like a puppet's strings being pulled taut. It turned its head sharply, not toward me, but toward the tree line. And then it bolted. Fast. Too fast. Its movements were wrong, jerky and inconsistent, like someone imitating the mechanics of running without understanding the fluidity of muscle and bone. Its hooves hit the ground in strange rhythms, not the clean thudding pattern elk usually make. The sounds staggered and doubled as if two sets of hooves were inside one body. It vanished between the trees. I didn't pursue it. Not immediately. I stood there for a long moment, the tranquilizer gun still raised, chest heaving. The ground beneath me stopped vibrating, though a faint echo of the movement still rang up my legs like aftershocks. When I finally lowered the gun, I noticed something else. Tracks. Heading down the trail I had just walked, weaving in and out of my own footprints. Only these were not hoof prints. They were too long, too narrow, and too deeply pressed into the earth, as though something with immense weight and a disturbingly precise gait had followed me all the way from the collapsed shaft. My radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't the distorted voice. It was a familiar sound. Breathing. Slow, uneven breathing. Not mine. Not human. I turned toward the station door. The breathing wasn't coming from the radio, it was coming from inside. The lights inside the station flickered once, long enough for me to see a silhouette move across the back wall, a shape too tall to stand upright in that room. A shape with antlers. But the antlers weren't attached to a head, they were being held by something standing behind the desk. The lights steadied, humming faintly in the wooden rafters, but the silhouette remained, tall, motionless, wrong in ways that made my stomach crawl toward my spine. The thing behind the desk, whatever shape the darkness had sculpted, held the antlers as though it were examining them, testing their weight. They dangled at its side from one elongated arm, swaying slightly, tapping once against the metal filing cabinet. That tapping sound, soft, hollow, rhythmic, was identical to the one I'd heard inside the collapsed mine shaft. It knew I was here. I didn't breathe. Or if I did, it was shallow enough that my chest barely moved. My hand hovered over the tranquilizer gun again, even though every rational part of me knew that if whatever stood inside that station wanted me dead, a dart wouldn't matter. The thing was taller than any elk, taller than any man, too tall for the structure it stood inside. Yet the ceiling didn't seem to press against it. It made room for itself in the geometry of the building, bending shadow around its body, occupying a dimension that didn't belong to the architecture. The station windows fogged over from the inside, not from temperature, from breath. My radio hissed. A burst of static tore through the speaker, followed by the faintest murmur. I turned the volume down, hands shaking, but the whisper came through anyway, too faint to understand, too intimate to ignore. A voice shaped like language but hollowed of meaning. The silhouette behind the desk tilted its head as if listening. The breath fogging the windows pressed harder, smearing the glass like palms dragging across it from within. Then the lights flickered again. Once. Twice. 3 times. And the silhouette stepped forward. Only it didn't walk. The distance between us simply disappeared. 1 second, it was behind the desk. The next, its shadow filled the doorway, stretching toward me like spilled ink as if leaking from the frame itself. The antlers scraped softly against the doorframe, not because they were attached to anything, but because the thing inside was too broad to pass through without brushing them. The temperature dropped so sharply that my eyes watered. I could taste cold metal in the back of my throat. I took a step backward. The silhouette did not move, but the pressure in the air changed. A low vibration rattled through the ground, faint enough that the pine needles barely trembled. The smell of burnt hair and soil, dampened by fresh blood, seeped from the doorway. I forced myself to speak. Human voices can anchor reality, or at least that's what we're trained to believe in emergency response. If something goes wrong, an injury, a collapse, a predator sighting, you talk. You state facts. You assert presence. I said the first thing my brain supplied. Identify yourself. The voice that responded didn't come from the doorway. It came from behind me. A whisper, wet, breathy, stretched thin by a throat that hadn't formed correctly. It said my name. I spun around so fast my vision blurred. Nothing was there. The forest stretched silent and dark, the trees standing too still, their branches curved toward me like listening ears. My breath fogged into the air, then bent unnaturally again, pulling slightly toward the open station door, as if gravity had shifted. When I turned back, the silhouette was gone. The station door was now wide open. A warm draft rolled out of it, carrying the scent of wet fur and burned pine. The warmth should have been comforting, but instead it made my skin crawl. Heat didn't belong in winter nights. Heat was a lure. I approached the threshold slowly, my footsteps muffled by the strange elasticity of the soil beneath me. Something in the ground felt alive again, vibrating faintly with each step, as though keeping rhythm with my heartbeat. The inside of the station looked normal at first glance. Desk, radio, maps, shelves, the kettle I never used. But the normalcy sat wrong, like a stage set built from memory rather than direct observation. And then I saw the tracks. Not on the floor, on the walls. Scuffs and smears just above eye level where hooves should never reach. Long, dark streaks trailing across the wooden planks in arcs too intentional to be random. Each streak ended in a single indentation, as if something had pressed forward, pushing into the wood with immense weight, testing the structure for weakness. The lights flickered again, but this time the bulbs dimmed down to a faint reddish glow, like old heat lamps left running in empty barns. I stepped inside. The warmth thickened, almost humid, like breath suspended in the air. My radio crackled softly on my shoulder, static mixed with something else. A voice, breathing, movement deep underground. It cut in and out, too fast to identify. I tried the light switch. Nothing changed. The reddish glow pulsed once, and I realized it wasn't coming from the bulbs. It was seeping through the narrow floor vents, the ones that fed into the crawl space beneath the station. A space no larger than 2 feet high, used mostly for utility routing and inaccessible from outside. A faint scratching echoed from below. I crouched near the nearest vent, listening. The scratching stopped. Something exhaled. I jerked back, stumbling into the desk. The antlers, still lying across its surface, shifted slightly. Not under my hands, on their own. A low creaking sound filled the room as the floorboards flexed beneath my boots. Something moved in the crawl space, slow, dragging weight pushing through soil and wood. The ground vibrated again, this time stronger. My radio hissed. Then a voice whispered through it with perfect clarity. I didn't want to be alone. My heart punched against my ribs. I recognized that voice. It was Andrew, the missing boy, 12 years old, soft-spoken. The voice I'd heard only in dreams. The voice that didn't belong to a living throat anymore. I backed toward the door, but the door slammed shut before I reached it. Lights flickered harder. The reddish glow intensified, spilling out from the vents, warming the air in unnatural, pulsing waves. The scent of burnt hair thickened until my eyes watered. Something pressed against the underside of the floor, hard enough to bow the wood upward. Then again, like a fist pounding upward from the earth. A crack split across the floor in the center of the room. Soil bulged through the widening gap, scattering splinters. The pounding stopped. Silence swallowed everything. I held my breath. My pulse filled my ears with a deafening roar. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the floorboards in front of me dropped, collapsed inward into a hole that hadn't existed seconds before. A wave of heat and rotten air surged upward, slamming into me with the force of a physical blow. I staggered backward as something shifted in the darkness below, something massive dragging itself toward the opening. I reached for the doorknob, but the metal seared my hand. Too hot to touch. The station shook, dust raining down from the rafters, and from the hole below, a sound rose, deep, resonant, layered with voices. One of them was Andrew's, another sounded like me. Then another voice, breathy and distorted, whispered from right behind me. You shouldn't have followed it. I turned. Something stood inches away, wearing the shape of the elk, except this time it wasn't missing its eyes. It had mine. I recoiled so violently that I struck the wall behind me, knocking a framed topographic map to the floor. The creature mirrored my movement, Not with delay, but perfectly synchronized, as though my body were controlling it instead of the other way around. A sickening sensation crawled across my scalp. The face, or what it used as a face, tilted slightly, the way a curious animal studies a wounded one. But the sockets weren't empty anymore. They bulged with glossy wetness, eyes glistening in the dim red pulsing light. My eyes. The exact shade, the same little freckle just beneath the iris in the left one, a detail I had only noticed once as a teenager, staring too long into a bathroom mirror. The thing blinked. I felt nothing behind my eyelids, but the reflex jolted through me anyway, as if my nerves were entangled with its. The floorboards rattled again. Something beneath the station scraped against the soil, shifting closer to the hole in the center of the room. I didn't dare break eye contact with the creature. It watched me with a stillness too meticulous to be instinctual. Not predator stillness, mimic stillness. I had the deeply sickening realization that it wasn't waiting to kill me. It was waiting to finish learning me. The radio hissed, then clicked. The same distorted voice I'd heard by the collapsed mineshaft murmured through the static, but this time the cadence was unmistakable. It was repeating my breathing. The air thickened with heat, waves rising from the vent cracks and the gaping hole, creating a faint shimmer around the creature's silhouette. The smell of scorched earth invaded the room, layered with something sweeter, something nauseatingly familiar. Burned pine sap, like resin dripping onto a campfire. "Back away," I managed to say, though the words felt weak in the heavy air. The creature repeated them. Not through its mouth. Its mouth didn't move. It spoke through my radio, perfectly matching my tone, my hesitation, the slight rasp that years of cold mountain air had carved into my voice. I reached for the tranquilizer gun. The creature reached for the tranquilizer gun. But my hand moved with intention. It was a reflection, an echo, but an echo a fraction of a second behind. Not enough to escape, but enough to understand the timing. I lunged sideways, rolling across the ground just as the floor beneath the creature bowed inward with a crack like splitting bone. The pressure from beneath surged upward, rocking the entire station. Dust rained down. The creature's posture faltered. For the first time since I saw it, its movements weren't smooth. They were clumsy, raw, incomplete. I scrambled toward the door, ignoring the burn welding itself into the skin of my palm from touching the metal earlier. When I grabbed the knob again, the heat was gone. Cold now, almost frostbitten, I wrenched it open and stumbled into the night. The air outside hit me like a shock. Sharp, clean, frigid. No warmth, no scent of burnt hair or sulfur. For a brief second, I could pretend the world was still real. Then the ground trembled behind me. The station lights blew out with a pop, sending the building into perfect darkness. I backed away, eyes locked on the open doorway, waiting for the creature to step through. Nothing emerged. Not at first. The radio on my belt clicked loudly, once, twice. Then a voice, thin and stretched, whispered, "Don't leave us again." My breath stalled in my chest. The words cut into a place in me I had spent 8 years barricading off. The pronoun was wrong. Us. Plural. Not singular. I didn't have time to unravel the implication because the doorway darkened. Something pulled itself upward from the hole beneath the station. The silhouette rose slowly, fingers or limbs approximating fingers, gripping the beams inside to pull more of its mass upward. The building creaked sharply, protesting the weight. The heat returned, rolling out in steady pulses, bending the air around the station. I stepped back farther. Branches above me trembled, even though there was no wind. The elk-shaped creature appeared again, emerging from the doorway, but it wasn't alone. Its body moved strangely, jerking at unnatural angles, its limbs bent wrong. Its neck twisted until the antlers scraped the doorframe. That alone should have stopped it, but the antlers passed through wood as if the matter wasn't fully solid. I realized this one wasn't the same elk shape I'd seen earlier. It was smaller, incomplete, practice. Something behind it was learning shapes. I could hear movement deeper inside the station, heavy, dragging, deliberate movement. A second shape, then a third. No. I turned and ran. The forest swallowed me in seconds. Darkness clung to the pines like a second layer of bark. My flashlight bounced wildly across trunks, branches, splintered roots. The trail was barely visible, a narrow, pale strip through the trees that my feet knew better than my eyes. I ran until my lungs burned, until the freezing air shredded my throat, until the forest tilted slightly underfoot and I almost fell. But the forest didn't feel empty. It felt alert. Watching. Waiting. Every branch creak sounded like breath. Every shadow felt too dense. And at some point, seconds, minutes, I don't know, I became aware of something running parallel to me, matching my pace just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Its steps didn't fit any pattern I recognized. They weren't hoof steps, not paws, not human feet, something like joints against wood. The radio crackled again, a soft sob drifted through the static. Andrew, then a whisper, barely audible. "You left me." I never stopped looking, I whispered without meaning to, the words tearing out of my throat. Something in the shadows ahead froze. Not something. I saw the outline now. Someone. A child's silhouette, small, trembling, standing in the center of the trail. My heart hammered against my ribs. I swung the flashlight forward. The beam touched empty air. No child. But the ground where he'd stood trembled, just once, just enough to send a vibration up my shins. The soil pulsed as though something beneath it was following my footsteps, tracking my escape. The trees thinned as I reached the lower ridge, where the old service road twisted toward the ranger housing further down the valley. My breathing ragged, I veered toward the dirt road, skidding slightly on loose gravel. Something followed. No sound of pursuit. No snapping branches. Just presence. Pressure in the air. The sensation of being watched by multiple sets of eyes, none of which sat at the correct height. I reached the first service cabin, a small storage shed, and slammed myself against the wall like trying to catch my breath. The night felt wrong here, too warm. The air carried the faint smell of burnt pine sap again. When I peeked around the side of the shed, my stomach dropped. Figures stood between the trees, not moving, not breathing. 4, 5, maybe more. Elk shapes but stretched, modified, rehearsing themselves in the stillness. Their bodies twitched subtly, like muscles firing without a brain to coordinate them. And their heads slowly turned toward me in perfect unison, empty sockets widening slightly as if adjusting to light that wasn't there. A wave of heat pressed against my chest. Branches overhead crackled and a low vibration traveled through the soil. Something much larger moved beneath them. And then one of the figures lifted its arm, not a leg, not a hoof, an arm, human-shaped. It beckoned. Not with a gesture, but with gravity, the subtle pull of the ground shifting beneath my boots, trying to bring me closer. The radio clicked softly. A child's voice whispered, "Come back underground." The pull beneath my feet strengthened, subtle but undeniable, like the ground was no longer something I walked on, but something that breathed, something that wanted me closer, something that remembered me. I forced my boots deeper into the gravel, bracing myself against the shed wall. The twisted elk figures in the trees did not move, but the shadows around their bodies quivered as if stirred by heat waves. I tore my gaze away and scanned the dark for an escape route. There were only 2 options: back into the tree line, where the mimic shapes waited, or down the road toward the lower cabins. My body chose before my mind did. I ran. The old service road sloped sharply downward, half-frozen dirt crunching under every step. My flashlight beam jittered wildly, bouncing off trunks and snow patches. The smell hit me halfway down the slope, burned pine sap again, sharper this time, mixed with the sour stench of wet fur. It coated my tongue, thick and chemical, burning the back of my throat like I'd inhaled smoke from an invisible fire. Behind me, the forest shifted, not loudly, but in a way my body recognized. A pulse, a rhythm. The terrifying awareness of something pacing me on both sides. One set of steps too close to be separate, the other impossibly far to sound as loud as they did. The radio crackled without warning. Stop running. My legs buckled. It wasn't the words, it was the voice. My voice. Perfect cadence, perfect strain, perfect breathlessness. I reached for the radio instinctively, as though reasoning with myself might stop whatever was hunting me, but the radio wasn't on. The sound hadn't come from it. It had come from the trees. I pushed harder, lungs screaming, feet slipping on frozen mud. The service cabin came into view, a small, single-room tool building with a metal roof and a flickering motion light above the door. Normally it stayed off unless a bear or coyote wandered near. Tonight it pulsed in strange intervals, bright, dim, bright again, like something was standing just outside its range, teasing the sensor with deliberate movement. When I reached the door, I yanked it open and slammed it shut behind me, locking the deadbolt with shaking hands. The heat inside was non-existent. My breath fogged instantly, drifting like smoke in the narrow beam of my flashlight. Tools hung on the walls, shovels, chains, an old length of climbing rope. Boxes of gear lined the floor. The room felt too small, too fragile, like a rib cage thin enough to crack if anything pressed too hard. Outside, the forest went silent, a silence thick enough to hear my pulse. Slowly, deliberately, something stepped onto the gravel outside the shed. The motion light did not trigger. Another step, then another. But the weight of the steps, no elk made that sound. Not even the largest bull. This was heavier, dragging slightly, with a low shudder running through the earth each time it landed. The boards in the shed walls creaked in response, as though adjusting to pressure. I held my breath. A soft scraping sound traced along the wall to my left. Claws? Hooves? Fingers? I couldn't tell. Something brushed against the siding. Something tall enough that I could hear its joints shift, creak, reset. Then it spoke. Open the door. My heart stuttered. That time it was definitely my voice. Open the door, it repeated. But the second time, the pitch wavered. Slightly too high, the inflection unnatural, like someone trying to recite a line in a language they didn't understand. Then a third voice joined it. The child's voice. Andrew's voice. Please, the small voice whispered. Please don't leave again. My knees nearly buckled. I pressed myself against the far wall, fighting the urge to curl in on myself. I had spent years burying that memory. The moment the trail went quiet behind me, the exact instant I looked away, the second I told myself he was right behind me when he wasn't. Stop it, I whispered. You're not him. Something leaned against the door, the wood bowing inward a fraction of an inch. The lock strained. The air inside warmed with a sudden pulse of heat rolling up from the floorboards. Open the door, the creatures chorused again. Then a new sound threaded through the overlapping voices. Breathing. Wet, labored, close. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the floor. I dropped to my knees, shining my flashlight onto the uneven boards. The cracks between them glowed faintly red, pulsing in slow sync with the warm waves radiating upward. Something moved beneath the shed, a shifting of soil, a dragging weight that made the ground flex subtly with each motion. The boards under my palms vibrated. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The floor swelled upward in 3 places, as though something large was pushing its back against the wood, testing, adjusting, mapping the weaknesses. A fissure formed between 2 boards, widening by a hair's breadth. I scrambled back against the wall. The door buckled again. A voice, at once mine, Andrew's, and something else, murmured through the wood. Come back underground. The boards beneath my feet flexed a final time, then broke. The floor split open, swallowing half the room in a jagged, gaping maw of soil and hot air. A burst of steam blasted upward, fogging the room, turning my flashlight beam into white haze. The shed tilted violently, half its foundation sinking as the ground below gave way like wet clay. I lunged for the doorway, but the door itself was bowing inward under the pressure of something pushing against it from the outside. Its hinges groaned. The deadbolt strained. A wide, spongy handprint appeared on the wood, too large to be human, too soft-edged to be animal. A blend of both. Trapped. Heat pulsed again, rushing up from the hole beneath the ruined floorboards. The room filled with an almost liquid humidity. I dropped to the ground, coughing as the air thickened with the stench of scorched fur and sulfur. Then something rose from the hole. Not fully, just a silhouette at first. Broad shoulders, one elongated limb dragging behind. The The tips of antlers, or something pretending to be antlers, scraped the beams overhead, shedding flecks of wood. I scrambled toward the far corner of the shed, slipping on debris, hitting the wall so hard my teeth rattled. The creature stopped rising. A long arm extended toward me, the hand wrong, too many joints, fingers bending in multiple directions. It didn't reach to grab me. It simply hovered, trembling slightly as though waiting for me to take it. Then another arm emerged beside it, smaller, child-sized. My breath caught. The smaller hand opened and closed once in a weak attempt at a beckoning gesture. "Come back underground." Both voices whispered in perfect unison. "I'm not going down there," I choked out. The large hand recoiled slightly, then pressed itself against the beam, gripping it with an unnatural strength. The shed shook, dust raining down in thick sheets. The creature pulled itself higher, rising inch by agonizing inch. The hole widened around it, soil collapsing in clumps. I looked at the door. It bowed inward again. A crack formed at the edge of the lock. A new voice joined the others. Not mine, not Andrew's. A deep, resonant growl that carried the weight of stone and fire and breath drawn from caverns older than any mine. "You followed it," the voice rumbled. "Now come home." I grabbed the only thing near me, a rusted ice axe hanging from the shed wall, and hurled it at the door. Not to fight the thing outside, to break the hinges. The door tore free, flying outward into the dark. Cold night air rushed in like salvation. I didn't think. I ran straight into the open. Behind me, the shed collapsed into itself with a roar. The ground trembled, and from the hole beneath the ruins, something screamed. A sound layered with my voice, with Andrew's, with something ancient, something that had learned too many shapes. I didn't look back as I ran. I couldn't. The scream rising from the collapsed shed wasn't a sound meant to be processed. It was meant to be obeyed, to be followed into the earth where it belonged. The night swallowed it quickly, but the vibration it left behind stayed in my bones, shaking them like tuning forks. Every breath burned. Every step felt like it might be the one where the ground opened beneath me. The service road bent sharply ahead, and for a moment the world tilted. Snow patches blurring into streaks, trees melting into elongated shadows. My vision pulsed faintly red, like the glow from the crawl space had lodged behind my eyes. I wiped at them with the back of my sleeve and only smeared the brightness across my vision. Hallucination, I told myself. Oxygen deprivation. Shock. But the warmth radiating up from the soil told a different truth. Heat waves rose from the frozen dirt like the earth had begun to boil under its crust. And the smell, my God, the smell. Burnt hair mixed with wet soil and something sweet like decaying berries left too long in sunlight. Something was wrong with the land under my feet. I reached the next bend in the trail and nearly collapsed when a figure stepped out in front of me, human-shaped. Still, tall. I skidded on gravel, arms flailing to keep balance. The flashlight beam cut across the figure's face. It was me, or something wearing me. It stood perfectly upright, eyes shining with a pale film like frost, mouth slack but not open, chest rising and falling with breath it wasn't taking. Its shoulders twitched once, mechanically. Then its head tilted, slow, precise, until it matched the exact angle the elk creature had used the first night it appeared at the station. I took one involuntary step back. The mimic me took one step forward. And when it lifted its hand, I didn't need the flashlight to see it. It had the same scar across the knuckle from when I split my hand on a rusty metal latch 6 years ago. It had all the details right, except the eyes. The eyes were not mine. They were empty, hollow impressions filled with something that looked like reflection rather than substance. When I moved the flashlight's beam, the eyes didn't respond to the light. They responded to me. They shifted with my breathing, my trembling, studying me with the hunger of a creature learning a language. The ground beneath us pulsed again. A voice rose from the soil, so faint I thought it was memory until it grew louder. "You left me." Andrew's voice. From beneath, from the earth. I stumbled back another step, but my heel caught on a root, sending me to the ground. The mimic me didn't lunge, it didn't move fast, it just stalked forward with a slow, dreadful patience, like an actor waiting for the perfect cue. Stay away, I rasped, scrambling backward. It kept coming, lifting one leg over a fallen branch, leaning down slightly, shadow stretching over me in the cold night air. I grabbed a fist-sized rock from the ground and hurled it. It struck the mimic square in the sternum with a hollow wooden thud, like hitting a tree trunk. The mimic staggered, but the shadow didn't. The shadow beneath it wriggled, detached, lengthened, pulled itself toward me like ink spilling across the forest floor. No, not shadow. A second shape. One the mimic had cast only to distract me. I pushed myself upright and ran off the road, plunging between trees. Branches tore at my clothing, whipping my arms and neck. Frozen needles rained down with every desperate step. Behind me, 2 sets of footsteps followed, one heavy, one soft and loping. But it wasn't their sound that drove me faster. It was their silence between steps. Absolute. Deliberate. Predatory. The forest opened into a clearing I knew too well, a flat section of land where the old decommissioned bunkers sat half-buried under moss and pine needles. There were 4 of them, originally built for wildfire crews decades ago. 2 remained locked under layers of rust. One had collapsed into itself. The 4th, on the far edge, had a hatch welded shut by the department 20 years earlier after a structural safety assessment deemed it gravely compromised. I headed straight for that one. Something in me, fear, instinct, madness, knew the creatures wouldn't expect me to go underground willingly. The welded bunker door loomed ahead, metal streaked with rust like dried blood. I grabbed the heavy padlock, braced my foot against the door frame and yanked. It didn't budge. I grabbed the broken-off shovel handle near the dirt mound beside the bunker and jammed it under the latch. Footsteps approached the clearing. Close. Too close. I jammed the handle again. Metal groaned. The smell of burning fur drifted closer. I slammed my shoulder into the hatch. The lock snapped with a violent crack. The door fell inward, shrieking against its old hinges. I dove inside. The bunker swallowed me whole. Pitch black, freezing, stinking of mold and rust. My boots hit concrete. I grabbed the door and pulled it shut behind me, plunging the bunker into total darkness. My breaths echoed off the walls, too loud, too fast. Outside, footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, sniffing. Wet, dragging inhales against the metal door. Something pressed against it, hard. The bunker shuddered. I backed farther into the darkness, groping for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand found a metal pipe, brittle with corrosion. It would snap after one hit, but one hit might be enough. The sniffing continued, slower now, more deliberate. Then a soft knock. 3 times. Light, polite, human-sounding. No, human-like. "Let me in," my voice whispered from the other side of the door. I held my breath. "Let me in," it repeated, a perfect mimicry. "You're so close, don't leave again." Then a small voice, Andrew's voice. "I'm cold." A weight pressed harder against the door and the metal bowed inward. Something scraped down its length. Fingertips, too many of them, searching for leverage. The ground beneath the bunker quivered. Heat began to rise between the cracks of the concrete floor. No, not here. Not underground. Not again. I backed deeper into the bunker until my shoulders hit the far wall. My flashlight beam flickered to life, barely strong enough to cut through the darkness. Then I saw it. On the opposite side of the room, a second door, not part of the original bunker design. Not metal. Wood. Ancient, warped, swollen with moisture. It hadn't been installed. It had been uncovered. The concrete around it had cracked outward, as if something behind the door had pushed, straining against the bunker itself. The wood bulged, sank, bulged again. Breathing, a whisper seeped through the grain of the wood, not from one voice, but many. "You followed it?" They murmured in layered tones. "Come home." Outside, the main door to the bunker screamed under the weight pressing against it. The hinges warped. A single bolt popped free and clattered across the floor like a dropped tooth. I stood between 2 doors, one behind me, about to break inward, one in front of me, struggling to break outward. The heat surged from beneath the bunker, rising through the cracks like steam from a fissure. Something beneath the earth wanted me. Something outside wanted me. And both things sounded like me. My flashlight flickered harder. For a brief second, I saw a reflection on the metal wall, not my face. My face without eyes. Then the final hinge on the bunker door snapped. I closed my eyes, not in surrender, in refusal. I would not see what came through. Not again, not this time. Behind my eyelids, I saw Andrew's silhouette at the cave mouth in my dream. Empty sockets, a small hand reaching. Not for help, for replacement. The bunker door blew inward with a roar, metal screaming as it struck the ground. Heat washed over me, voices surged in unison, and everything went silent.